invest in people in the long term, there has to be a mutual understanding.
Hustle hard, hustle hard. Closed mouths don't get fed. Thinking strategically, but acting like a gorilla is the kind of marketing that's small. When it innovates very little, it's highly risk averse, and it takes the
If we're going to grow professionally, if we're going to be able to operate within a workplace, we're going to have to engage in some level of conflict. It could be disagreeing with somebody, it could be standing up for ourselves, it could be figuring out the best time to sort of be more passive, to disassociate with certain people, which is in a sense an avoidance strategy, which we'll talk about. It's a conflict. It's turning away. It's saying, hey, there's something here I don't like, and I'm going to turn away from it. And as we grow and progress in our career, our ability to use tactics and skills and to be able to perceive what's happening and to make wise decisions in the moments, those critical moments, I think not only will it help us socially and it'll help us emotionally to just be able to deal with life in general, but it'll also be something that'll help you stand out as a leader and as a manager. And it is without a doubt, if you haven't already figured this out, it is inherently baked into building things. So let me see if I could say it like this, and let me switch slides so I don't get caught up on it. When we start building things at work and in life, building relationships, building businesses, building teams, building a work environment to hopefully be more constructive, in essence of building is going to be disagreements, is going to be decisions that are having to be made, is going to be uncertainty and ambiguity baked into building things. If those things don't exist, you're probably not building things of value. And in order to build things of value, we need to build things with other people. And in essence, what I'm trying to say is there will be conflict. And it's not about whether or not there'll be conflict. It's about how we handle those moments when there is conflict and the strategies that we put into play and what we take out of it and how we learn and grow through that conflict to actually become a better team, a better relationship, a better couple, a better um, business, all this kind of stuff. And so it is inherent into building things that are worthwhile is conflict. So I hope to. So understanding key strategies to resolve conflicts effectively is important. So we'll learn about strategies tonight. I mentioned that for our personal and professional success, conflict management and negotiation skills are needed. And then I think this is a big one that really can't be understated is that, for instance, this morning I brought my daughter to a camp. And when I brought it to the camp, the people at the camp weren't expecting me. And they were kind of off put by me kind of bringing her there without calling in preparation. Long story short, they kind of looked at me like, what are you doing here, kind of thing, and say, well, she didn't register. And I said, oh, I understand. And I immediately said, I'm sorry. And I apologize. I must have, overseen something, but we came last year. I was really hoping we can get my daughter into camp today. And immediately with that little strategy that I deployed to kind of ease the emotions that were kind of happening as I was wandering around this camp, they reduced their threat level and they understood my situation and they saw that I was apologetic for my presence, unexpected presence at this camp. And I actually was able to get my daughter into this camp last minute, which was amazing. Very thankful. And so there was a level of heightened tension in the sense that it could have went one way, it could have went the other way, but by deploying some level of being calm, cool, and collected, and to affirm their power and their authority running this camp, I was able to do something. I could very well be like, okay, see you later. I'll put her in a different camp. You don't want my money? I'm out of here, kind of thing. So you can understand how it reduces tension and improves relationships and increases productivity. It just is helpful to have some of these skills and to not think that our emotions are in control because we have tactics and skills and strategies to notice conflict. That's a really important thing, to perceive that something here is happening, that my emotions have been triggered, and that in addition to that, I have these arrows in my quiver that I can pull out and shoot strategically in order to diffuse the situation, in order to get what I want out of the situation, hopefully attain this win-win, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So why conflict management matters. Conflict is inevitable, but can be managed constructively. Unresolved conflicts can lead to workplace toxicity and lost opportunities. Successful resolution builds trust and collaboration. So these last two are fascinating because if we don't engage in this process that we'll talk about tonight by seeing conflict and having a healthy way to either, let's just say, collaborate, to cooperate, to collaborate, and also to compromise, and then possibly to compete in a healthy way, we could, if we were avoiding or just accommodating, just kind of saying yes to people all the time, being a yes person, and or also just being too agreeable, or also just avoiding and building resentment. Those two things are toxic. They create toxic behaviors, and they don't allow us to talk about these things that need to be talked about. There's a funny scene at the end of a movie called Office Space. I think the guy's name is Milton, where it's like a perfect situation that this guy was asked to do things that he did not want to do all of the time. And at the very end of the movie, he ended up burning the entire building and business down because he did not have a healthy outlet to his conflict, to his pain, to his anger. And that's a joke, and it's obviously a movie, but it's in a way true, like metaphorically burning a relationship, metaphorically unleashing your anger on somebody that's undeserving because you didn't have this healthy outlet. So we get the idea. So common causes of conflict. Why does conflict exist? There's so many reasons, but here are five. Miscommunication, misunderstandings create unnecessary disputes. Differing values. Remember, we talked about values yesterday. Our values are not, or sorry, last class. Our values are not aligned. Personal and cultural differences. Competition for resources. Conflicts over money, time, or attention. Thinking that there's only one pie and we're only going to get a slice of the pie, and we better go get our slice quick because it's not an abundance mentality; it's a scarcity mentality. So that's another reason for conflict. Unmet expectations, perceived broken promises, personality clashes, different work styles and attitudes. All right, so that's my little start. I'm going to play this one video and then I'm going to ask some questions. So hopefully this video, if you can tune in, will elicit some thoughts. And I'll set up the video before I play it. I watched this video for the first time a little bit before class, but I've heard about this video through multiple different news sources. And if you all know, one of my favorite actors is Will Smith. And when I watched him in Men in Black, it was just a classic movie when I was that age. I thought he was awesome. He was an action hero. I mean, I still think this guy is super talented. There was a book by Angela Duckworth where she defined grit, and Will Smith is this kind of hardworking, just gritty kind of guy. But when I saw this just now, I kind of was like, wow, that's tough what he did there. And again, I'm not trying to throw any kind of opinion into the situation. I'm just trying to use this as an example of possibly ask the question, how could this have been done differently? How could we have managed this particular moment in a way that maybe caused less of tension and backlash and all this kind of stuff? And here's the last point that I'll make before we watch this somewhat interesting video. And if you're like me, you get this pit in your stomach, like, oh my God, so that just happened. So essentially, Will Smith smacks Chris Rock in the middle of the Oscars. So that is the clip that we're going to watch. But every time whether we engage in conflict and these emotions arise in some kind of way, whether it's a work environment, whether it's in a friendship or a relationship, whatever that may be, the our emotions are a real thing. They're a fact. They're happening. These are facts happening inside of us. What we do with our emotions is a different kind of thing. And so when we act out in anger or this kind of behavior that you're about to see, the consequences of that are sometimes everlasting. We can't take it back. I've said things to people that I love that I wish I never said, and they may forgive me, but they may not forget. So again, another reason why to be able to have some of these skills to handle conflict is so very important. So here we go. Here's the infamous scene where Will Smith smacks Chris Rock at the Oscars. Move away from the backstory of it and seeing just two people that have different goals and that there's negative emotion involved with an interaction. And you see Chris Rock with a goal to entertain and trying to build content. He is a comedian and he found this to be something that he could drive off of. He had a goal and he thought his goal to be appropriate. Pretty straightforward. Yet Jada did not agree with that goal. And it was Jada who's the brunt of the goal. So the whole G.I. Jane joke. And she was not happy about the behaviors of Chris. And then now you have this other party, call this other party the enforcer, if you would, that decides to take action on the conflicting goals. And anytime there's a conflicting goal, like if Tony and I had, Tony wanted to eat pizza for lunch and I wanted to eat Chick-fil-A, and we're in one car and we have to go one or the other. And I really want pizza. I mean, we were just talking about Italy. And Tony says, well, I really want Chick-fil-A. We have conflicting goals, and how we handle that in a mature fashion. And we'll talk a little bit about this, what humans used to do 1,000 years ago when there was
Rock,
conflicting
paper,
goals.
scissors.
There you go. I mean, that's a fair trade. Or, some of the ways. So that would be essentially, that would be something called compromising. But what we could do is we could have a win-win. And so it's funny when Tony says, okay, we have to do either or. That's compromise. I say, let's go get a slice of pizza and then let's go to Chick-fil-A. That would be my ability to say win-win. Or guess what? We can go to Chick-fil-A first and then we'll go get some pizza. So we could very well work towards achieving a win-win for both of us. And that in a situation like this, obviously there's a party who's negatively affected and it might be hard to find a win-win, but I promise you, if these two men, grown men who are successful, Chris Rock and Will Smith, and bring Jada into the situation too, if they were able to sit down and have a rational conversation as intelligent human beings and they cared about each other's interests, they could have found a way to spin that in a positive direction for every party involved. And Chris Rock could have very well came out with an apology and they could have used it in some influencing gimmick to bring about, millions of views and some new movie premiere if they just worked together. And candidly, the response actually elicited more people to hear the joke than not doing anything. So it's a fascinating clip, and I'm happy that you guys engaged. So this is the next one is the one I saw today. Actually, I was listening to a news station, and I just heard some, this is another person that I candidly enjoy a lot. I used to bring Justin Bieber, by the way, this is who it is, into a multitude of talks I've given to Chamber of Commerce people. And the video I used was him playing the drums when he was a kid. And a lot of people think that people go from, you know, let's just say one day they're nobody and the next day they're rich and famous. And this 99.9% of the time isn't the case. Justin Bieber had a talent that he was fostering since he was a little kid. And his parents and the people around him helped him build these skills. And he put a lot of work into his talent, a lot of work. And he is a young man that did go through a lot of things. And again, I'm not putting my thoughts out there on him, but he is a human being like all of us. And there's a situation that he had paparazzi surrounding him, and I don't know. You can be the judge whether he handled this well or not. But he got very angry, and I don't know if he was coming out of a club or if he had been drinking some alcohol or whatever that may be. But so let's watch the clip and let's see, how could maybe he have handled this better. And so the person on the other side of this, call this person the paparazzi. Paparazzi gets a bad shtick, but the paparazzi is also doing their job. It is their job to just let the public know what these rich and famous people are up to. Take pictures, videos, and they have outlets they send them to. Is it an appropriate thing? You can be the judge of that. But it's about not about necessarily their their goal, but it's about how they go about dealing with the conflict that is obviously a part of this conflicting goal. The paparazzi has one goal, and Justin Bieber has a different goal, and we'll see what that is. And some of you may not have seen this clip. I think it just started circulating recently, but so here it is. Yeah, I agree with the extreme nature of the situation. Let me try to bring it back to reality. The everything that he just said is a setup to say I have spent, let's just say, 25 years of my professional life trying to build up a name for myself, credibility, a brand, to be able to act like a gentleman in public, to be a good husband and a father, to not lose my control and my emotions and relationships that matter. And one incident of me losing my cool at work in either one of these cases could destroy my career. And so to bring it back to somewhat of a relevant stance, possibly in times of heightened conflict, there's emotion in us, and there's rationale in us. And for us to be able to discern in those moments, how should I act? How should I talk? What should my tone be? Just see if maybe I should walk away. These are all critical moments for us to continue to build our career and to continue to have credibility and to continue to protect our reputation. Our reputation is probably one of the most important things that we all have. And regardless of what work environment you're in, there are small things that you can do over time that will discredit your reputation. And there is one horrible thing you can do just once that will discredit your reputation. So how can we protect our reputation in an integriful manner? Meaning, how can we go about our business and still assert ourselves, still make sure that we stand grounds and set boundaries and make sure people understand who we are, what we represent, what's important to us, and not have to do it in a way that will dismantle our reputation. There were a couple times, and I guess I'll ask just one last question about the Justin Bieber clip that we watched. There were a couple times where Justin Bieber could have very well walked out of that situation, but he didn't. Why? He could have very well left, but he continued anyways. And I don't know about you. I'll be very vulnerable, very honest. There have been times in arguments where I should have just sat down and shut up. And that would have done much better for both me and the person I was arguing. And unfortunately, I kept saying the things that were popping into my mind, and I didn't need to. And as I grow and mature, and as I try to assess and reassess how I behaved, and maybe I could have done things better, I stopped doing that. I started doing the things that we'll talk about in class tonight. And so this happens in professional relationships as well. I had a faculty meeting not too long ago where two faculty members that I respect very much, their credibility was it was hampered a little bit because they got into a tit for tat, non-rational power struggle together in the middle of a faculty meeting. And yeah, faculty members tend to be people who argue with facts. They sort of like argument in a way because there's a lot of pushback and intellectual kind of power struggle thing happening. And I sort of enjoy that environment to a degree. When you start attacking people's character, when you start saying things that probably aren't justifiable about other people, and that they'll make it. It's a non sequitur. Like you go from talking about course design to all of a sudden somebody else is not trustworthy. It's like wait a minute, how is talking about course design to now you're attacking the person at a character level? How does that transition? It doesn't, and it's simply an emotional attack as opposed to a valid argument, a quality conflict resolution, and working towards some kind of mutual beneficial solution. So these are some things that we're going to talk about. So any other comments before we get into the presentation portion of this? there's something called that. I'll just briefly, because you're talking about debates and arguments, that's an extremely powerful concept, right? When you're, and it's just a simple tactic that if you're at a standstill and somebody has this position and you have this position, we can go with the pizza and the let's dig it a little bit deeper. Let's say that I'm a big fan of globalization and somebody else is a fan of protectionism, meaning like we want to keep things in the same country, we don't really want to trade, we want to have high tariffs, versus let's open up our trade to the entire world, let's globalize our world, which has, both of them have positives and negatives. For me to take a look at the opposing argument and to say, you know what? Let me try to do something called steel manning that argument. It's a powerful concept to say all of the things, literally say it out loud, that argument represents. Well, this actually justifiable. This is good. I understand you're saying this. I understand you're saying this. And you're building up their argument so that it is fair. You're saying fair enough. Like some of these things you mentioned have credibility. I listen to these arguments and I take these arguments into consideration when I build up antithesis to that argument. And here's my antithesis, and here's why it's stronger than your argument. That is a much more powerful stance than just something called strawmanning. You just attack the arguer, you attack the person, you don't know what you're talking about, or how dare you attack one element of the argument, try to dismantle the entire argument. You're strawmanning it. But it's a powerful technique to listen and understand somebody's perspective and build that empathy and say, I get it. And then to transition into your argument, here are the facts and evidence of my argument and why I still believe that my stance is the correct one. The person you're arguing against not only will say give you some clout for doing that and hopefully respect you for at least listening to them, but the people witnessing, if you're in a conversation or if it's a public debate, they will build a lot of trust and credibility towards you as well, because of the fact that you're not just blindly standing for something that you're just ignoring every other position. That's not a great thing to do. If you remember, it's not a great example, but 8 Mile, this movie with Eminem, and at the very last rap battle, again, if you're a fan, basically what happens is he in this rap battle, essentially they say a whole bunch of bad things about the person that's getting roasted, and so he goes up there and it's his turn to roast the people, and he roasts himself. He says, here's what I am, here's all the things you're going to say about me, here's where I grew up, here's what my girlfriend is, here's who my mama is, and this is the private school I went to, whatever it may be. And he dismantles everything they were going to say about him on his own. I know these things, fact. And also, let me say something about you. And it was just an awesome scene. If you've seen the movie, maybe you know what I'm talking about. But that's the power of steel manning somebody else's argument in a conflict. It matters. Understand what the person's saying. Okay, so as usual, I'm a bit behind the aspect here. So here are some questions just to consider. If you feel compelled to answer one of them, please do so. I'll pause at the end of each one of them. So, what common sources of conflict do you observe in the workplace, and how might these differ depending on the work environment? So, what are some common conflicts in the workplace? And the work environment part of it. So, if you're working, let's just say that you're in construction and you need to build a shed, just to keep it simple. And it's very clear that your shed is falling down, like it's not standing. It may be easier because you can tangibly see what's happening. And somebody comes in and says, "Hey, your shed's no good." It's almost like, well, okay, fair enough. Versus, and that could very well be a conflict, versus what I would consider this interpersonal, knowledge-based work economy that we're in, where it's all about, did you send the email in the right way? Was it respectful? Did you go to this person as opposed to that person? What was your investment strategy, or how did you deal with that customer on the phone? Were you as eloquent as you can possibly be? And there's a lot of gray area involved. And I'm putting those two up against each other because it might be less prone to conflict in an environment where you can tangibly see something that you're working on together versus something you can't really tangibly see. And there's a lot of opinions kind of thrown out there and a lot of possibly gossip about who's doing what and who's not doing what. So you can see that's just an example of how work environments impact the types of conflicts that we enter into. Okay, second question. In what ways can supervisors effectively address bullying behavior before it escalates? I love the fact that you set the expectations and then you reinforce those expectations. And if somebody gets out of line, you make sure there's consequences. And one of the things that there's a terminology called civility in the workplace. So just treating each other with a general understanding and respect. This is how we behave around here. Here's what we expect. And then when things deviate or get out of line, there's consequences. And enforcing those consequences is important. If I said to you all, hey, make sure you come to class on time, whatever, and that's cool, and then nobody ever came to class on time and there were no consequences, there would be no on time. It wouldn't be enforceable. So there has to be a standard, and then with the standard, there has to be consequences when that standard is broken, or it's very difficult. That was good. Okay, good. So it's so great that we have these thoughts about how we should handle bullying in the workplace as we're sitting on a Zoom call and hopefully not being bullied. But let me say it this way. It's not common for bosses and leaders and managers to always handle this well. In a lot of sense, they may say, "Oh, it's a policy. We don't do it." But then when they see it, they don't do anything about it. Or when they see it, they sort of hope somebody else is going to correct it. Or when they see it, they might correct it, but they might not correct it in a way that's assertive enough, or um, it doesn't have any consequences involved, or maybe they're extreme about it. Maybe they're, there's when you say zero tolerance, maybe what your idea is of bullying and my idea of bullying, that they differ. So maybe there should be some fungibility, some negotiating. Hey, I just want to be clear, what you did there wasn't okay. I want to remind you of the policy, as opposed to seeing someone making fun of somebody at the water cooler and all of a sudden you say, you know what, you're fired. There's no bullying here. Let's get out of here. So these are some things that we'll have to figure out as we learn and grow through managers. And hopefully I'll shed some light on this today. I'm going to read these last two questions and then I'll get into some solutions or answers or takeaways that hopefully you can bring with you into your workplaces. So the next question is, what strategies can individuals use to approach conflicts constructively? We'll talk about that. And how might these change depending on the situation? How can leaders foster a collaborative culture that reduces conflict and promotes open communication? There's a lot to that. So what is workplace conflict? It's any disagreement. Remember, you think this, I think that's friction. By the way, friction is not always a bad thing, or clash that occurs between individuals or groups within a work environment. So I would think that a normal work environment throughout the day, if you have 10 people, is going to be at least things that you would determine as conflicts, at least 10 conflicts every single day. You're going to disagree, or you're going to have friction, or you're going to have some kind of clash with somebody throughout that day. Almost every person might, unless you're a perfect, human being, and you never disagree with what anyone says, and this kind of stuff, which in itself is probably not an ideal way to be. So that's what conflict is. It's essentially a situation where people have differing opinions, goals, or needs. That's a big one that create tension or disruption. People's needs differ. I don't need the same things that Denise needs. Denise doesn't need the same things that I need, but she'll never know my needs unless I express them to her. And I'll never know her needs unless she expresses them to me. If I say to her, my need is for you to, be quiet and listen to me, is that a healthy way of expressing my needs? Or can I do a better job at saying, hey, Denise, when we're hanging out and we're talking about business and we're talking about work, I notice that when I say something that you're on your phone. Do you think that maybe when I'm talking about work or things that are work related, do you think you could put your phone down? That's a much more constructive way of expressing my needs and asking for somebody to meet them, as opposed to just, erupting emotionally. So here we go. What are the root causes of conflict in the workplace? Indecisiveness, that's a funny one. Lack of a collaborative environment. There's a communication gap, frustrations, unclear objectives, clash of egos. That's an interesting one. Lack of understanding and a lack of trust. I would think that a lack of trust, even feeling psychologically safe that I can put my ideas out there, or I can act in a way that I believe to be appropriate, that other people are going to not use that against me, that my vulnerability won't be used against me, that my ideas won't be dismantled, that if I share an image or a picture of somebody that is work related, that you're not going to send that to my boss and tell me that I'm slacking off at work. So this lack of trust is a big deal, and trust is built over time. But trust, believe it or not, is actually built through, very important to understand, our ability to handle conflicts constructively. To go through that process with somebody inevitably will build trust if you do it well. So there are power dynamics happening at work. There's formal power, there's informal power, and the power dynamics play into conflict as well. In any situation, you have power. This is one of my key messages whenever I go out and speak to people, especially individual contributors, people who aren't managers. I explain this thing called personal power. Personal power is expert power. It's relational power in a sense, and it's also it's called referent power. You have expert power, and then you have it's expert, referent, and then there's informational power that you have as well. Things your expertise in something, and the relationships that you have with people are all forms of power. You don't have to have a title and the ability to coerce somebody, or the ability to give rewards, which would be formal power. You don't have to have that in order to have power. So this is what power is about. But sometimes it turns out when there's a power imbalance, there's much more likelihood that conflict is going to take place. When power is a little bit more equal, there's a little bit less of a chance of conflict. There's a less of a chance of conflict being done toxically. Like meaning, if there's an equality of power, a little bit more even of power, you're going to work through the conflict in a better way. So unequal power, employer versus employee, affects conflict outcomes in a negative way. And obviously, what I just said is when power is a little bit more equal, we tend to choose tactics that are more constructive when we engage in conflict. Power can be real or perceived. An example, a manager resolving disputes fairly increases workplace morale. So that's power conflict. So perceptions, and we haven't got to any of these techniques yet because it's important that I set up these realities. If you've seen the movie Inside Out, which is another, um, when we talk about emotions, that emotions are real and perceptions are real. How I see things is going to be different than how you see things. I think I may have played a clip from the Ellen DeGeneres show at some point. I don't think I played it in any of other workshops, but there's a scene of the Lanny versus there's two different words that people think they hear when they hear something. It's like Lanny and something else. And they're two totally different words. And half of the people hear one word and the other half of the people hear the other word, but it's the same sound, but people hear it differently. And you can see this picture here. I don't know what this picture is about. I think there's two faces. There's a white face and there's a black face over on the left. And then there's like a trophy in the middle. If you see the trophy, and I think in some way, if you look at it, there's like even like a witch or something. I don't know, but you see things differently. So it's a vase or it's two faces. If you can see that. So this is the point that perceptions play a crucial role in how conflicts arise and escalate. In essence, conflicts often stem not from objective reality, and this is a fascinating point, but from how individuals perceive a situation, other people's actions, and even their own intentions. It was somewhat of an argument with my wife, and the whole basis of the argument, the foundation of it, was was on two totally different terms. She was talking about it's a silly concept, but she was talking about narcissism, and I was talking about neuroticism. They sound similar, and she was right with what she was saying with defining what narcissism is, and I was right defining what I was saying about defining what neuroticism is. But I thought that she was talking about one thing, and she was talking about something totally different. And here we are for like 10 minutes debating the definition of terms, which is such a neurotic and narcissistic thing to do to begin with. But the point is, once I realized they were talking about I thought we were talking about the same word. We're talking about two separate words. I was like, oh my gosh, we've been talking this whole time. And there was just one little fact here that if I just understood that fact, I would never have engaged in this conversation. We would have just agreed and moved on with our life. So that's where perceptions matter. And also, a lot of times, let's just say you're a supervisor. Now, let's look at it this way: you're an employee. You walk into your supervisor's desk, and it's Tuesday at 10 a.m. You say, "Can I talk to you?" So they say, "Sure." They're in the middle of doing something, and you say, "Hey, I'd like to see if I can leave early on Friday. I got to pick up my kids or something like that." And your supervisor looks at you and says, "I'm sorry, you can't do that. You can't leave early on Friday. You left early last Friday, and I can't allow that." And you say, "Okay, fine." You turn around and you go back to your desk. And in reality, what all you saw was you needed something, and your supervisor said no. But what you didn't see and maybe didn't know is that your supervisor, you were the third person to come into his office that day and asked to leave early on Friday. Not only that, he or she is short staffed on Friday and they need more people to be there. Also, your supervisor got in trouble 2 weeks ago for letting people out on Friday when he wasn't supposed to. So what you perceive is my boss said no to me. But the reality is the supervisor was dealing with a multitude of variables. If you understood their perspective and you engaged a little bit more in the conversation, you even went back and said, "Hey, I'm just curious, is there a reason?" And you listened to what they had to say, there's a good chance that you would understand and that perception would be a little bit more intact. So perception matter. This is a fascinating one. So sources of conflict, again, some sources are relationally driven and some are content driven. Let's talk about that. Relationally driven conflict based on issues unrelated to the specific issues of discussion or outcome. So it's not about the getting out on Friday, right? It's not about whether or not I can leave early on Friday. It's about the fact that my boss is mean to me, or my boss doesn't like me, or that he and I don't have a good relationship, or she and I don't have a good relationship. So that's how a conflict would be about a relationship as opposed to about the content. So role pressure, a person's role may demand they win, or someone expects them to win. Personality clash, some people just don't like each other and may not ever change their views. Status threats or threat of self-concept, a person's self-concept may be threatened. So the reason why I read this is because it's a real thing that if you're a manager leader and there's a relationship clash on your team, you can try all you want to talk around the facts and be rational, but if the two people just can never seem to get along, they're going to clash regardless. And it might be a good idea to put them on two separate teams. It might be. We had a landscape business for a long, long time, and we would send out these account managers to deal with customers, essentially manage their account. And every once in a while, the account manager would call up and say, I don't like this account manager. And this account manager was great. Like 90% of the time, people would like them and they do an awesome job. But this one customer just could not get along with them. And I'd go to the account manager and say, well, what's going on? This customer's upset. Like, listen, I tried everything I could. I can't please this person. And so what do? I don't go to the customer and say, you know what, we don't want your business anymore, or whatever. And I certainly don't go to the account manager and say, you're fired because the customer doesn't like you. I just simply say, no problem, sir, ma'am. I understand that you don't get along with this person. I would be more than happy to assign you a different account manager. The new account manager's name is so-and-so. They can meet you at your property in 20 minutes. How's that sound? And they're like, yeah, fair enough. Thank you. And then next thing you know, I don't hear from that customer for another 2 years. It's like all they needed was a different person. And sometimes conflicts can be understood at that level. versus content driven conflict based on issues inherent in a decision making process. Whenever you engage in a decision making process, Chick-fil-A or Pizza Hut, we're going to the football game versus the basketball game, or we have four options of activities next weekend. And so now we have to engage in a process. And in that process, there's going to be uncertainty, ambiguity. There's going to be a different set of goals and opinions. There's going to be valence, meaning that people are going to weight these different options in a different way. And for us to understand that that's going to take place whenever we make important decisions, and to not be naive that everybody's just going to agree with what everybody wants to do, that's going to be just a simple consensus and everybody's going to vote in one direction. That's naive and it's not true and it doesn't happen. And we don't want that to be true, because if that was true, we probably wouldn't come up with the best decision. And we want the best decision so that we can have the best outcome. So engaging in that decision making process and allowing conflict to happen along the way and to be able to manage that conflict is so very important. Issues, facts, interpretation, method of approach, etc. So we talked about values differences, perceptual differences, and different goals. So we're mostly going to talk about this content-driven conflict for the source for the rest of this conversation tonight. So here's something I want to make sure we get to before I take up too much time, because we could probably spend most of the rest of the class on this little chart right here. And this is going to be the main takeaway for tonight. These are called we gravitate towards these conflict management styles, essentially is what this is. These are our tendencies of what we tend to do, and we all have one or two of these that we choose when conflict is happening. So you can see, let me see if I can help you understand, and I have a quick video to help you understand. This is, again, the core takeaway. What do I do when I'm involved in a particular conflict? Do I avoid? On this axis here, this is increasing assertiveness. As you can see, there's zero assertiveness in avoiding. You withdraw from the situation, maintains neutrality, a lose-lose outcome. So we talked about, and the reason why I talked about, should Will Smith have done what he had done? The alternative, the avoiding says, is he does nothing. He says nothing. He does nothing. He retreats into his turtle shell and he allows somebody to speak harshly towards his wife in a public forum, and his wife is angry and he does nothing. So that would be avoiding. And you can see how, in sort of the way that I set it up, that may not be the right thing to do. It may very well be the right thing to do. Is it if his wife wasn't upset and nobody else was upset, and he sort of feels insulted inside, and he doesn't have the thick skin, maybe he should just avoid. So that's one strategy. Another strategy, as you can see up here, which is not avoiding, this is increasing assertiveness, is competing. And so I would think that Will Smith's reaction was competing. It's a zero-sum orientation. It's a win-lose power struggle. I mean, it doesn't get much more win-lose than getting up on stage in front of you and just smacking somebody. And that's like, I'm here to assert my dominance over you and physically harm you because you did something wrong to me. You lose, I win. Competing. And in a lot of situations, and this is not necessarily always a bad thing in the work environment, these are all strategies, by the way. They all have their positives and negatives, depending on the context, depending on the situation. A competitive work environment where you're working in real estate, where you're doing things that require you to compete, isn't always a bad thing. There was a book written about like the lion's heart of executives or something like that. And they were trying to understand, how do executives negotiate? And it turned out that a lot of these higher level executives were doing this competing strategy simply because they understood this was the way it happened. They just would compete with one another and they would always want to win, and they would do negative things towards one another. And it was a game that they play. And inevitably, they understood that this was the game that everyone plays, and sometimes they'd win, sometimes they'd lose, but they'd keep fighting. They'd compete with one another. There was a ton of, obviously, counterproductive things that would come from that. And if you're the type of person that does that all the time, you have to think to yourself that you're probably running over, steamrolling some people, and that's not good. And there may be other things happening to you in your life that aren't good as well. But you can see how competing is a strategy that people use. Let's move over here to compromising. Compromising is another strategy. People say they enter into conflict, and maybe you're somewhat avoidant of conflict in a way, and somebody wants something and another person wants something, you just compromise. Say, okay, well, I'll get Chick-fil-A today. You'll get Chick-fil-A today, and I'll go ahead and get pizza next week. You get something, I get something, but we kind of, that wouldn't be a good example. Let's say that you have one piece of pizza left, and instead of what you do is you want a whole slice of pizza. Denise wants a whole slice of pizza. I want a whole slice of pizza, but there's only one pizza left. So we compromise. We just cut the pizza in half. You get a half, I get a half. So we both sort of make this concession, if you would. Like, okay, fine, I'll have a half a pizza. Okay, fine, I'll have a half a pizza. As opposed to saying, hey, listen, let's give this slice of pizza to the friend that we have over there, and let's you and I go to the store and get a whole nother pizza. And that's not compromising. That is, which is the quintessential win-win, which is the goal of what we want to get to, that is collaboration. And if we can move up into the right here, if there's one thing I could teach you in this little workshop that we're doing tonight, is collaboration. This is expanding the range of possibilities and options. It's a win-win situation. And this takes patience. It takes controlling our emotions. It takes kind of understanding the needs and the goals of the other party, but also at the same time, because look, it's on the assertive scale. It's not like we're backing away. We're also expressing our needs, our desires, and our goals. So we're hoping that they steel man our perspective, and that we steel man their perspective. And we realize that if we combine these two perspectives, somehow we can both win. This is the quintessential aspect of negotiations. There's something called the David Accords, which is the peace between, I think, Israel and Egypt. And it's been like the most cherished peace agreement in such a long time. And it is the example that when I was reading into this today, that they both really won something. And that helped them keep the peace. So what is it that we can do and we can both win that will allow us to put this conflict in a place of, wow, we actually achieved something from this? It's like iron sharpens iron. We got better because of the conflict. Okay, and the last one is accommodating. Accommodating is, so I'm sitting on the couch, or let's say you're sitting on the couch, and your brother, sister, whatever, significant other, parent says to you, you're sitting on the couch and you're watching something that you want to watch. You're engaged in whatever you're engaged in. And previous to your sitting on the couch, fully engaged in what you're engaging in, you made a sandwich. And the sandwich was, as I'm sure you understand, there's like crumbs on the countertop, and maybe there's like some mayonnaise spilled over there if you're a mayonnaise eater, and then maybe the pickle juice is sort of somewhere, and there's like chips, and you just made a mess making the sandwich. If you can envision the residue of a post sandwich making on the countertop, and you got the sandwich, and you're sitting on the couch, you're enjoying it, you're watching the game, and your significant other brother or sister says to you, like 1 minute into your enjoyment of the sandwich, that you made a mess on the countertop. Can you come over here and clean it up? And so in that moment, I guess I'll ask to see if anybody has a what what response would you give in that moment? Sitting on the couch enjoying your sandwich, somebody says, "Clean up your mess." What would you do? So back to the sandwich example, because I want to use that. So another response that somebody with maybe a little bit more transparency would say, they would look at the person and say, "Hey, I just sat down. I'm not cleaning up the mess. Like, leave me alone. You clean up the mess." That is an option, right? Like, hey, if the mess is bothering you so much, why don't you clean it up? And I'm not, obviously, I say those words in that tone. It's not the right response, but it is a response. And it is a strategy to say, hey, I'm going to stay here watching the game, eat my sandwich. And you clean up the mess. So I win. I get to stay here and eat my sandwich. They lose because they have to clean it up. So now let's take a look at the other person. The person says, hey, can you clean up your sandwich, mess, whatever that may be? And they say to me, I'm not going to clean up the mess. I'm going to stay on the couch. You clean it up. And if I then clean up the mess, I accommodated to them. So I have an option here. I made a gesture towards somebody. I asked them to do something. And so their response will trigger a strategy in me as well. So my response, if they say, hey, I'll do it later, I say, that doesn't work for me. I understand you want to do it later, but I have some guests coming over in a little bit. Do you mind doing it within the next 5 minutes or something like that? And they still engage in the conversation and say, okay, thanks for letting me know. I didn't know you had guests coming over. And yes, if you give me a couple minutes to finish my sandwich, I'll come and clean up the kitchen in a couple minutes, as opposed to just cleaning it up myself. So it just takes that one extra step with some clarity, some additional information to tell them your goals, to express yourself not avoid, not just be super cooperative, but to assert yourself and to try to get something out of it as well. And the avoiding would be, I see the mess on the countertop. It bothers me. And instead of saying something, I don't say anything. And I build bitterness inside of me towards the person who made the mess. And 2 weeks later, instead of telling them nicely to clean up their mess, I break a dish in the kitchen and run out of the house and never come back. That's because those things happen too, because that bitterness was built up so much. And what I heard there is it's not a content driven conflict. It's more of a relationally driven conflict, because the person is perpetually acting a type of way, not just about one thing, but about many things. And a little bit more challenging to deal with that. But let me tell you something. If you were to look at this screen here, I'll tell you one way you don't want to deal with it. And I guess this wouldn't be directly giving advice, but saying, hey, avoiding is not an option. To continue to be belittled in a way that's frustrating and to be managed by somebody who's micromanaging and potentially telling you how to do things that you already know how to do. And imagine sustaining that for years. Imagine having to try to grow in such an environment and just never engaging in any kind of conflict. And I'd say accommodating is also not necessarily an option. Meaning, what are you going to do? Just say yes all the time, and then eventually you're just going to quit or whatever. And you could very well be being bullied by your boss. So we have to figure out ways to work our way up towards collaboration and compromising, but choosing each incident differently. Meaning, maybe when they ask you to do something that's fairly straightforward, maybe accommodating is the right thing to do. But when they ask you to do something absolutely outlandish and crazy, you just say no and you compete. You say, no, I'm not going to do it. Sorry. See you later. But over time, figuring out a way to work through collaboration to address some of these character defects, in a sense, or these general overarching managerial issues that you're having with somebody, these things are going to have to be discussed and talked about at a deeper level. When you do this, I feel that. And that's not an easy place to be if it's happening often. But let me see if I can keep going because this might help. Collaboration is the goal. We want to have a win-win, and see if we can use Jacqueline's example as a thing we can throw through this. Collaboration is the preferred negotiation style, resulting in a win-win for all parties. So how does a manager win as a micromanager, and how does a subordinate win being managed by a micromanager? Well, idealistically, the micromanager trusts the subordinate over time, and the micromanager stops micromanaging, and the employee becomes happier. So now the micromanager is no longer a micromanager. Now the employee feels empowered and can work in an environment that's healthy. That's a win-win. But in order to get there, it's going to take some work, right? So, known as interest-based negotiating, it involves understanding each other's desired outcomes and working together. What is it that the employee wants? Well, the employee wants to do their job without being micromanaged. What is it that the manager wants? Well, the manager wants to make sure everything gets done so that they feel productive and are performing well. Okay, good. Now we understand what each party needs. Now the question is, how do we bring those together and move forward? Because building that compassion and empathy for one's manager, even if being micromanaged, is one of the only ways to actually move through such a conflict. Clear communication, focus on interest and multiple options for mutual gain. How can we both win? How can we mutually gain from this situation? Even asking the question in a moment of, instead of accommodating, say, hey, I'm sorry, can we talk about something? You seem to, this is the third time you came to my desk today and asked me to do something. Do you mind if I ask, like, how can we both, instead of you coming to my office 5 times today, 5 more times, how can you not come to my office again and you can just tell me everything now and you can trust that I do it at the end of the day? How can we make that happen? Because that would be easier for you because you don't have to come by here all the time. And it would be easier for me because I can actually get my work done. Asking these kinds of questions, how can we find a mutual gain, are essential for successful negotiations. It has to be mutual. Okay, so this win-win, more about collaboration. Promotes cooperative conflict resolution. Examples: labor unions and management finding a compromise on wages. Focuses on shared interests rather than competing positions. Shared interests rather than competing positions. Here's just a visual of these different strategies. You have the competing right here, as you can see. Everybody loses, this person wins. Accommodating is just, I'll do whatever you ask me to do, honey, no problem. Avoiding, not a lot of good things happen from avoidance, I'm sure you can tell. And then compromising, this is kind of decent way to go. You do this, I'll do that, fine. But collaborating, as you can see, even in the picture of collaboration, it's amazing what AI does. It's got light, it's got smiles, it's got two people turning towards one another. So if you're looking for a visual, this is it. And then obviously all these other visuals, like compromising is sufficient, but not enough. And then accommodating looks great, but as you can see, over time, those rose-colored glasses that this guy has on his face is going to turn into an angry man that isn't going to want to do it anymore. There's an interesting stat in relationships. It's about this 8-to-1 ratio, that every exchange that I have with you can't just be a positive exchange. Meaning, if Carmen and I are friends, and every single time Carmen tells a joke, I laugh. Every single time Carmen wants to go get pizza, and I say, yes, let's go get pizza. Every single time Carmen wants to go, I say, no problem. Let's do what you want to do, Carmen. Oh my God, you're so funny. This is great. Eventually, Carmen is like, well, it's not even fun hanging out with you because you're not challenging me on anything. You don't have any insight. You don't have any input. You don't have a thought of your own. There's no friction here. So 8 times we exchange, we want to have a positive exchange. For every 8 times, there should be one time where we're like, no, I don't like that. And what you just said wasn't funny. I think it can improve. We want that friction because that friction makes us better. It's actually positive for us. So again, this is the point of just accommodating, is not, not only will you be trampled on, but people will lose respect for you and they won't want to hang out with you anymore. So accommodating is not obviously ideal in the long run. Okay, let's get to this last one because I think we're running out of time and this is a fun one to think about. I wish I could say this is a strategy. I gave you those styles, the 5 different styles to be something to think through. We kind of defined what conflict is. Why is it important we understand it? Here's some things you want to avoid. Here are the ways not to handle conflict. And here's another one that if you could just take this away, it'd be good. And maybe some of you have tendencies to do this. This was an old school AI image creator. But these are Gottman's 4 horsemen. I remember these things because I like to name it the 4 horsemen. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are 4 communication behaviors that can signal the breakdown of relationships. These are toxic behaviors that happen instead of engaging in a healthy conflict, because we had Professor Kirshner's workshop and we understand conflict happens. In order to build something great, sometimes we have to enter into conflict. We can't necessarily always avoid, we can't necessarily always accommodate. We understand. Now, what happens when we choose to disregard everything Professor Kirshner said? This is what happens. So behaviors that can signal the breakdown of relationships: criticism, attacking the person instead of addressing the issue. So we end up gossiping and attacking a person. The person has a character defect. There's a concept called the fundamental attribution error. So Carmen comes to work late, right? And I'm Carmen's boss, and she comes to work late. She comes to work late often. And I say to myself, man, Carmen, she must be lazy. She just can't get to work on time. She's not a hard worker. She doesn't have a good work ethic. She must be lazy. So I'm attributing her behaviors to her character. That's the fundamental attribution error. Because when I come to work late, when I'm late to work, I say, oh, it's because of traffic. It was because of the circumstance. Oh, it's because I had to drop my daughter off at school. I'm not lazy. I'm not hardworking. So when I behave a kind of way, I say, oh, it's because of the things happening around me. It's because of the situation that I'm in. But when somebody else behaves that way, I say it's because of who they are. As you can see, this is an attribution error. We're attributing their behavior to their character as opposed to looking at the circumstance. So when we criticize people, what are we really criticizing? We're criticizing them as human beings. We're not criticizing the behavior, or nor are we criticizing the reality of their situation. So criticism is a tough one. Criticism, attacking the person instead of addressing the issue. So people will say, I don't like working with you. Well, why don't you like working with me? Well, you have a bad attitude. What does that even mean? I have a bad attitude. It would be a lot easier if someone says, hey, I find it difficult to work with you because when you you disagree with me with curse words, and I don't appreciate when you curse at me. I'm like, okay, like fair enough. I guess I should stop cursing at you. Like it tangibilizes, it allows me to understand the behavior, specific behavior that is leading towards them thinking I have a bad attitude or whatever, as opposed to saying you have a bad attitude. That's not very helpful. So you have to address the issue, not necessarily the person. So contempt, this is a tough one. When you're rolling your eyes at people in meeting, oh my gosh, this person. Ah, this is contempt. And it turns out in relationships, when you're rolling your eyes and you're contemptuous towards your partner, when you're contemptuous towards your boss, when you're contemptuous towards your friends, this is a recipe for disaster. It's showing of disrespect towards somebody. Next one is defensiveness, refusing to accept responsibility. Big one. So anybody who's been in any kind of therapeutic environment understands that the only thing in this world that we can generally control is our actions and our attitudes, our behaviors and our attitudes towards things. We can't control other people's actions and attitudes. I can do all I want to try to control my daughter and to go to bed tonight or to eat her dinner, whatever it is. I can't force her to go to sleep. I can't shove food down her mouth and make her swallow it. And even if I did, that's not controlling a person, that's abuse. So what can we really control? We can control our own actions, our own attitude. So being defensive and to not understand and be self-reflective is, what did I do that I could have done better? What are some things that maybe I contributed towards this conflict? What are some ways I can behave better? How can I go about this problem differently in the future? These are things that we can practice, not defensiveness. And stonewalling is the last one, withdrawing or shutting down. I just refuse to tell people how I feel and tell people my needs. And I refuse to allow people to um, get into. I don't trust anybody. I refuse to give my trust to people. The stonewalling. So recognizing and replacing these behaviors is essential for constructive and respectful communication. And constructive and respectful communication is going to help us with conflict management. So what are some things that we talked about tonight? And there's obviously like 30 more slides I could have showed you. Number one, I'll speak from my heart. Conflict, it exists. It exists everywhere we go, and there's ways in which we can handle it, and there's ways in which we can go about managing through conflict that are much more constructive than others. And I hope that you choose to practice ways to understand the needs of other people, to understand how to express your own needs in a healthy way, but also doing it in a discerning fashion, saying, is it the right place? Is it the right time? And do I have an audience that's actually going to listen to me? Is somebody else willing to cooperate? That's a big deal. If they're not willing to cooperate or collaborate with you, you're not left with many other options. You know what I mean? They're just not willing to collaborate. So you might have to move on or choose a different technique. One of the things that I'll tell you is that as I started learning about this and practicing this a couple of years back and putting on these these seminars, I started practicing with strangers. What does that look like? So when you have a stranger, you have less interdependency, meaning the stranger's behavior is not going to necessarily impact my life, but my boss's behavior is going to impact my life. So going back to, I think it was Jacqueline's question, is if eventually she's going to have to figure out a way to assert her needs and express her frustrations in a healthy way. But what we can do is we can practice that on the people. If somebody's holding the door for you, say, no, thank you. I got it. You don't need to hold the door. Don't worry. Or when somebody comes and you're at the beach and somebody comes and you're about to put some towels on a chair and like sit there and you're clearly like over the towels and somebody comes and like rushes in and throws towels on the chair and tries to claim the chairs in front of you. Excuse me, I'm here. Can you please remove your towels? They're strangers. What's the worst that can happen? They pull out a weapon. They might, you never know. But the point is okay, here's no, you're standing in line, you're waiting for your package at your apartment complex or condominium. Maybe you have a place where you need to wait in line to pick up a package. And an Uber Eats guy comes in and there's a lady at the front desk or a guy at the front desk that's like helping people. And the Uber Eats guy comes in and just hijacks the line and basically tries to go in front of everyone. You say to the person, excuse me, there's a line here. Do you mind waiting in line? What's the worst that can happen? You know what I mean? They could tell you no, and fair enough, continue on with your day. Or they could very, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I didn't see the line. And so you can practice these techniques of sort of asserting yourself, asserting your needs, and doing it in a constructive, non-emotional way with strangers. And when you start doing it with strangers, you're going to be better at doing this with relationships that have more interdependency, relationships that matter. And it's very, very important that we get this right in our relationships, in our work environment. And I hope that you learned something tonight. I know I'm running out of time, but I care about you guys, so that was the best I got. I hope everyone has a great night. If you have any questions, I'll stick after to answer them. But if not, that's all I got. And it's inspirational when you reflect on some of these leaders that one might consider to be heroes and think about their lives